All right, page 110, the other bodies. It would be good at this point to sum up what we have so far discussed about the levels of consciousness. We have seen how a bundle of consciousness, or the human unit of consciousness, is slowly moving under the pressure of evolution in the direction of higher complexity, or of more knowledge, of higher interaction, and a better understanding of nature, and therefore, as the energy exchange curve shows, towards more control over one's environment and more happiness. In Chapter 2, which deals with the micro-realities, we have seen that the physical body is made up of interacting, pulsating energy fields. What we call a physical body, flesh, bones, and blood, rapidly disappears when highly magnified. A physical body, therefore, or any piece of matter, can be viewed as an interference pattern of electromagnetic fields that changes with the passage of time. However, regardless of how tenuous our physical bodies may look under high magnification, they seem to serve us quite well as they interact with our physical environment. Let us see whether we can carry this a little further. Are there any chances of finding or inventing other bodies that would serve us as well in interactions with the other higher realities? The answer is yes. Interacting wave patterns will inevitably contain higher harmonics. In a less technical language, suppose we strike one of the strings of a grand piano and produce a middle C note. The string then vibrates at 264 hertz. Assume now that the cover of the piano is lifted and we have an unobstructed view of the strings. We shall notice right away that the eighth string, including the C that was struck, and counting up the scale, will vibrate quite strongly in harmony with the C string. The eighth string is a full octave higher, which means that it vibrates exactly at double the rate of the first C at 528 hertz. We find that other strings also vibrate in resonance. The string half an octave higher than the middle C, which is the note G, will vibrate at 396 hertz. Not quite as strongly as the previous string. Other strings will be found to vibrate even less. We can see that the strings that are separated by integral multiples of their vibratory rates, like 2 times, 3 times, etc., resonate best, while where the ratio becomes fractional, like a half or 11 times the original frequency, the exchange of energy with the original string is not as good. Let us go back to our vibrating bodies. We see now that we can make a reasonable assumption for the existence of bodies made up of the higher harmonics of our physical body. They may not look exactly like our physical bodies, and they may be outside the reach of our instruments and normal senses. We can also take these higher harmonic bodies and divide them into arbitrary groups. We can say that bodies vibrating within such and such a range of frequencies will be called the astral bodies. They will help us to interact on the astral level. Next would be bodies containing higher harmonics, which will allow us to interact on the mental level, etc. Successively higher harmonics of our physical body then will allow us to interact with higher and higher realities. These bodies will not interact well with our matter and will be normally invisible to us because of weak interaction between them and the physical body. To summarize, we have seen that the physical body is an instrument that allows us to interact best with our physical environment. This body is interpenetrated by bodies or fields having higher vibratory rates. They extend beyond the limits of our physical body. Figure 35. This is what clairvoyants can perceive as colorful egg-shaped halos or auras surrounding our physical bodies. They contain a lot of information about us for those who can properly read the meaning of the color, size, shape, and motion of these bodies. The most strongly visible of them would be the astral body because of the nearness of its vibratory scale to the physical. It is visible at about 18 to 24 inches from the physical body. There is another body we should mention here, and that is the so-called health aura. It is really an extension of the physical body and is made up of a cloud of particles given off by the physical body, such as the tiny salt crystals, small flakes of dry skin, keratin, molecules of water, ammonia, CO2, etc. We assume that this soup of particles gets excited by the bombardment of ultraviolet ultraviolet photons given off in small quantities by the skin, possibly due to mitotic radiation. Hence, we have a soup of charged ionized particles around the body that seems to be limited quite sharply on its periphery. This field is very sensitive to the state of our health, and hence its name, the health aura. It is possible for us to say at this point, without causing much consternation, that figure 19 in chapter 2, which showed how the static field produced by the body changes with the distance from the body, is actually a representation of the health aura and the astral body. You will recall from chapter 2 that the 4-inch limit of the almost vertical leg of the curve is very sensitive to the person's vitality level or state of health. Also, when a person is emotionally excited, the flat leg of the curve will increase in potential and rise about 30% above the normal level. This means that the emotional astral body has been excited to a higher level of activity, figure 36. You may have noticed that our higher bodies seem to be equated with the electrostatic potential about us. This isn't quite so. The electrostatic field is just one small component of these higher harmonic bodies, which fortunately we can measure and identify. The other components in which most of the energy of these bodies lies will have to await the development of new and different kinds of instrumentation. Putting it all together. We have described a set of bodies made of higher harmonics of the physical body, which interpenetrate our physical body. This mechanism allows us to interact on different levels of consciousness. A few examples may make this clearer. The basic underlying function of our physical and other bodies is to pick up signals or stimuli, process them, and respond to them. That is what makes up our daily experiences. Suppose now that we visualize ourselves as a radio-like device that is receiving 4 or 5 different stations simultaneously. One station will by far overshadow the others in loudness, and among the others there are also differences in their degree of loudness. We can liken the strongest station to the physical reality. Whatever comes in through this channel is heard most strongly, while the other stations, representing the astral, mental, causal, and spiritual realities, are weaker. Thus, people whose ears are not very sensitive will hear only the physical station, while people with more refined hearing will hear more of the weaker stations. The important thing to realize is that we are capable of listening to all the stations simultaneously. Our listening to the weaker stations would improve considerably if we could only turn off the loud physical station. This is what we do in sleep, in meditation, or in sensory deprivation chambers. That the loud physical station is on does not mean that we don't pick up what the other stations are broadcasting. Take, for instance, the sudden attraction or aversion we feel for someone whom we meet for the first time. We pick this up through our emotional band. In the case of a sudden attraction, our astral bodies, which extend beyond the physical, resonated in harmony. In the case of aversion, strong dissonances must have been produced. Finally, we come to subliminal stimuli. For example, a constant irritation with something or someone on any of these levels may appear as a Hold on 1 second. I will be right back. All right, back. Finally, we come to subliminal stimuli. For example, a constant irritation with something or someone on any of these levels may appear as a change in the physical body, as psychosomatic illness. Repressed anger, being a powerful emotion, may cause cancer in some people. Anxiety and uncertainty will cause ulcers in others. Frustration on the mental level may seep down into the physical level as depression, etc. The weakest station is the spiritual. This is the little voice that tells what is right and what is wrong, the voice of our higher self, our conscience. Sometimes we meet people with whom we share a common way of thinking, almost to a point at which, when confronted with a situation, we can predict their reasoning step by step and, as a result, their reaction to the given situation. Here we seem to resonate on the mental level, which is quite enjoyable. The intuitive gut feeling about success or failure of a project, for instance, is picked up through our intuitive band. When we find that two or more artists, scientists, or inventors have come up with an identical idea at approximately the same time, we can assume that they all tapped the causal intuitive level, where the idea happened to be waiting for them and they resonated with it. The brain. We have by now become acquainted with a profusion of bodies, but our brains seem to have been lost in the shuffle. Let me suggest that the brain is a piece of hardware, a computer terminal, which normally processes the input provided by the sense in the waking state. When the input from the senses is not processed, as in deep sleep, this piece of hardware is in a state of complete rest and is not generating any images. However, as soon as our consciousness becomes focused in the astral during the dreaming cycles, information from that reality will pour in, and the imagery of the action produced in the brain will be followed by movements of the eyes and sometimes limbs. An experiment with the brain. It would be useful to try a little experiment with our brains. Let us sit down in a comfortable position in a quiet place and try to stop our thinking process for a while. You may find that this is quite a difficult job. To make the task a little easier for you, I suggest that you visualize your senses turned inside your head. That is, that your eyes should be looking into your head, your ears should be listening to what is going on inside the head, and your senses are bundled up in the center of your head. Try to keep your mind blank. You will find that without noticing, you have been thinking. Try to see whether you can follow a thought all the way back to its origin. You may find that what later becomes a full-blown thought starts out at first as a tiny little impulse. This impulse grows and grows and eventually develops into a thought that is recognizable. This implies that we are thinking on a level on which thought is not yet formulated. For those who can quiet their minds as a result of long years of practicing meditation, a thought is a very coarse, big thing. It's like a truck rumbling through the head and disturbs the very fine equilibrium achieved by balancing the mind in a non-thought state. I suggest, therefore, that our brain is not the source of thought, but a thought amplified. As we have seen, it takes a tiny impulse, magnifies it for us, and only then does it become a thought. It appears that the thought does not originate within the brain. Rather, the brain picks up the tiny impulses implanted there by our astral, mental, or causal bodies. These couple very weakly with the physical brain and therefore at first can produce only a very weak signal in the brain. It is the function of the brain to amplify this signal for us into a useful form. Summary. Nature, or in the broadest sense of the word, creation, is made up of a continuous spectrum of realities. Present mankind happens to function most of the time in what we call the physical reality, but we also function to a certain extent within 4 or 5 of our neighboring realities as well. One can train oneself to interact in these other realities by using certain available techniques. Our successful interaction with these other realities depends on the extent to which we have developed our vehicles or bodies, which are matched to respond to the frequency span of each reality. These bodies are analogous to the higher harmonics of our physical bodies and contain all the information accumulated over many lifetimes. These higher bodies are centered most of the time about the physical body, but they can also move and function independently of it. At the transition called death, the higher bodies that make up our so-called personalities leave the physical body and continue their existence on the levels above the physical, which are to the unit of consciousness as valid as reality as the physical was previously. This unit of consciousness can still interact weakly with the physical reality. Thoughts or desires do not originate in the brain. They are generated by the respective bodies or fields that act on the brain to produce tiny impulses that The brain amplifies in thoughts. Thought exists below the threshold of a recognizable thought. Yeah,